Hello, this is Janet from janetsandberg.com, and you're listening to the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast, the weekly show that talks to peers and professionals who open up about their darkest moments when they felt like ending it all, why they didn't, and how they transformed their lives in order to triumph over the darkness and despair. Please remember to subscribe if you'd like to hear more inspiring stories. Hello, and welcome to the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I am Janet Sandberg, and I usually am the host of this show, interviewing other people. But today we are turning the tables, and I am going to be the guest, and we have a guest as the host. And the guest host for today is my husband, Lincoln. So, Lincoln, welcome. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. So as the guest host, I will welcome you to your own podcast.
Thank you.
My brief introduction is I am your husband, and I have always wondered about some of the things that are part of your work. And this latest bit, your podcast, is we've talked about me interviewing you a while back, just so I could learn more about the podcast, and here we are.
Awesome. I'm excited.
You look excited.
Well, yeah, let's go. What do you want to know first?
Okay. Well, first, let's start with you. So tell me who Janet Sandberg is as a woman, as a professional, as a podcaster. What makes you you?
Oh, well, that's a very large question. What makes me me? I mean, I don't know. You know, I don't like these big open-ended questions. I always have trouble answering them because I don't really know. I mean, I am a mom, I am a wife, I am a daughter, and an intuitive, and somebody who loves to be of service to others, to help others, especially when they are struggling, which is why I do what I do for my work and why I started this podcast, as just another way to reach out and help people. That's what I like to do.
Okay. Yeah, you've done a lot with your life, professionally and personally, before you started as a professional. What led you here? Why did you feel like the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast was an important aspect of your work? And you can include all of these things: wife, mother, daughter. What brought you to this table?
So I've been thinking of starting a podcast for a long time. And nothing really, and there are so many podcasts out there that I wanted to do something that was meaningful, not just start a podcast for the whatever, just to have a podcast. Like, I wanted it to be meaningful. And also I know that, podcasting is hard, and it takes energy, and it takes a lot of time before things really pick up. So it had to be something that I really felt purposeful about, so that I could keep going, even if there weren't that many listeners, to get to the point where listenership would grow. So I just kind of sat on that for a while. And then last year, a friend of the family died by suicide, and she was 23. And I just sort of immediately knew that was going to be the reason for this podcast. I, of course, been through dark moments and had my own thoughts about suicide over the years. And the thing that really got me about this friend's suicide was that I didn't know, that nobody was talking about her struggles. And she was far too young. And I was just like, we have to talk about these things. We have to talk about depression and darkness and let the people who are going through it know not only that they're not freaks and weirdos for feeling it, that a large portion of the population feels like that at some point in their lives, but also that there is hope, that you can make it through, life will get better, that this is just a moment in time. And it feels like it will never end, but it will. And I decided that would be it, the whole reason for the podcast. And the other thing is that when people are feeling that way, it's almost impossible to reach out and tell people you feel like shit. So a podcast is an easy way to receive those stories of hope without having to talk to anybody. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's why I started it, was just to be a little glimmer of light for people who have been through what I went through, and hopefully change the outcomes of more people's lives so that they stick around and wait for the good stuff.
Yeah. The nature of that state of mind is that you have convinced yourself that no one will care if you were suddenly not around anymore. And that is a powerfully terrible thing to be going through. Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask you about why these conversations are needed, but there you go. So in the intro to the podcast, you describe it as a weekly show that talks to peers and professionals who open up about their darkest moments when they felt like ending it all. And you've already mentioned this once, but do you have a story?
I do. Yes.
And what brought you to those dark moments, and how did you come out of that hole?
There have been many dark moments, which I'm realizing as I talk to more and more people on the show, that it's generally not just kind of a one-time thing. It's usually, once you have the thought, it's really easy to go back to it. That becomes sort of your new standard of low. But I think the first time I sort of casually toyed with the idea was in high school, where I was just like, life sucks and what's the point? And I had no intention of following through on it, but I was already sort of just generally unhappy, which now, of course, I realize is depression. But in the 80s, nobody knew what that was.
Yeah.
So
some vague DSM-4 entry.
Yeah. And unless you were clinically depressed or, actually making plans, it wasn't really a thing. So for me, it was just like vague sadness for no apparent reason, but it made me, just sort of wonder why I was here, and, would life ever get better? There was nothing specific. I mean, my life on the outside was great. Happy family, everything was great. I had school, I had friends, I had a great job, like part-time job after school, like everything was going as well as it could be for a teenager, but I was still unhappy, which I didn't understand, which made me think that there was something wrong with me. Therefore, maybe I shouldn't be here. And then life, sort of took hold and got faster, and I was distracted by, life was good for many years, probably 15 or so, until it wasn't again. And by that point, and I've mentioned on the show before, that I married a guy who ended up being emotionally and otherwise abusive. And that was really hard. And I got very depressed again, like to the point where I couldn't function. And then we ended up separating and getting divorced. And the years that followed, my depression was unbearable. And then throw the pandemic on top of that. And yeah, depression, anxiety, everything was too much. And I was in despair a lot. Like I would have what I called despair attacks, which is when I would just collapse into a puddle of tears and feel absolutely hopeless and just wonder what the point was. Like, why was I here? Every day is just like the next, and nothing good is ever going to happen. And why am I still here? Yeah. And I had a lot of those for probably about a year, just recurring over and over again until I realized that I should probably be medicated. And then that's what changed everything, was me getting properly medicated and getting a hold of my depression and anxiety. And not that I don't have bad days, but they're definitely, I haven't had a despair attack in a long time. So
yeah, well, that's a long span of time, starting in high school, and everything, like all of our brains are biochemically weird at that time anyway. So in some respects, we're incapable of irrational thought as teenagers, of rational thought. But that's a long stretch of time to use distraction as a coping mechanism. And the pandemic wasn't really that long ago. So, I mean, would you say that you are now on the other side of these experiences, fully and completely?
I have no idea.
Mm.
I don't know if I ever will be. I don't know if that's possible. I know that right now, everything is moving in a positive direction. With our marriage, which is about 2.5 years old right now. And, we've just bought a new house, and, building our life together is really super positive, and keeps me going. And I'm also still heavily medicated. So I think if I ever went off the medication, I would be terrified about what might happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as long as I am continuing to build the life that I want, and I keep the depression and the anxiety under control, however that may be, for me, it's the meds, then yeah, I think the odds are pretty good that I'll be here for a long time.
Well, I would certainly like that. Yeah, that does sound difficult, and like it's very hard to maintain.
Yeah, I still get tired a lot. Like when I've had a lot of good days in a row, which is happening more and more often now, I do sort of have a crash that kind of either just where I just need like a day of rest, or sometimes, like recently I did have that mental crash, where we were at a football game, and just out of the blue, we were having a really great time, and all of a sudden my brain is like, what if we weren't here anymore? Like just for no reason, my brain is like, we don't need to be here, or I don't need to be here. I'm talking about my brain like it's a separate person. But yeah, so every once in a while, my brain still likes to just drag me down just to remind me of how good things are going.
Um, yes, our systems become accustomed to a certain condition. And when we step out of that condition, it says, hold on a minute, wait a minute. That's not your norm. Let's get you back to your norm. And yeah, in cases where, you and I are both depressed people, that's the norm. And we have to fight, we have to constantly push against that tendency to keep ourselves small, or not go out, or not participate in things. And that's at a minimum. And the worst cases are, at these despair moments, and these thoughts of, what if I weren't here anymore? Yeah. So it sounds like you probably identify with the guests you've had on your podcast quite often.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's part of what makes me a good host. What makes it easier for my guests to talk with me and share their stories, because they know that I understand, that I've been there,
Mm-hmm.
that, everything that they're saying I could relate to. And it makes it easier for them to open up and be vulnerable and share their stories with not just me, but obviously our whole listening audience.
Right. And I know that your hope is that someone who needs this encouragement and these words of hope will hear them.
Yes.
And it will help. So as you've interviewed, you've published 29 episodes of the podcast so far. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What themes or experiences do you find the most common? And that's either, as a catalyst for those dark moments, or the things that brought them out, or anything else. What sort of common threads do you find among these stories?
I think, well, I tend to interview a lot of women. And I don't know that that's because women experience suicidal ideation more than men. I don't think that's the case. I just think women are more available to talking about it and sharing it. But from the women's perspectives, a lot of their experiences, when they were at their lowest lows, a lot of them were caused by being in abusive relationships, toxic relationships. And that seems to be probably the number one theme for why the women that I've met so far have thought about ending their lives, was just to get out of an abusive relationship.
Wow. That says a lot about a person's state of reality, when the first, or at least some of the earliest thoughts about how to change a situation is to just not be there anymore.
Yeah. Well, because they're so trapped and they're so afraid to leave, that's one of the or seems to be one of the safest and easiest options.
Sure. Yeah. Whereas from the outside, so many people who've never been depressed, or never had suicidal thoughts or self-destructive thoughts, would just say, well, just leave him. Mm-hmm. And I guess people have a certain personality type or brain chemistry. It's just not that easy.
Yeah.
And everyone's reality is their own reality.
Well, and also that's a side effect of being in the abusive relationship, is that they beat you down so far that you have no self-esteem and self-worth left. So you're like, I'm worthless. If they don't want me, nobody's going to want me. There's, this is it. So it's kind of there's several reasons that are all working together there in those situations.
Yeah, that makes sense. What have you found most inspiring as you speak to your guests and hear their stories?
Everything. Every single one of my guests has been inspiring in one way or another. And I think it's just like, if you can overcome suicidal ideation, like, you can just fucking do anything. Like, that is, like, I've been through a lot in my life. And I know how difficult it is to dig yourself out of that hole. And so anybody who has done that, and then on top of that, they're doing amazing things now. You know, so many of them have become coaches or leaders, or, you know, work in some way to be of service, to give back, not necessarily in the same sort of community, but and in some way in their life, like, they realize what a gift it is to be alive, and they share that with others.
Have you found that to be true for yourself?
I still honestly struggle with considering life a gift. But I do love to be of service, and I do love to give back, and I do love to help other people. And I do know that it gets better.
These are all true. They're factually true, and we repeat them to ourselves and to each other over, social media and, in the memes and all the things. But it really takes a leap to have those ideas inhabit your heart, and for you to truly believe them. And I also know that can be a struggle. So what kinds of things keep you going?
My kids, first and foremost. And every time that I have considered not being here, I'm like, I can't, because I can't do that to my kids. You are next on that list. I can't do that to you either. And yeah, and I always, I know that there is more out there for me. And I've yet to really fully experience what that more is. But the universe tells me that there is more there for me, and I need to be patient, which is really hard for me. It's hard for most people, but yeah, there's more. So I just keep living and keep hoping that someday I'll figure out what that is.
I hope to be around for all of those things. How has the podcast changed since it began? Or how have you changed as a podcaster?
I'm a little more confident 29 interviews in. When I first started, I didn't, I had basically had no idea what I was doing. I was like, well, let's just do this,
let's just talk in a mic.
Just dive right in. I'll talk to some people, and then, I kind of had an outline for how I wanted the conversations to go. And now it's just become more natural and more practiced, and becomes more conversational than interviewee most of the time. But it's different. Like, you have a different guest every week. I don't know them. I've never talked to them before until they get on for the podcast. Like, we are meeting for the first time. So it's always exciting, and I always find something wonderful and unique in all of my guests, and I love that. I love the meeting people and hearing their stories.
Well, as a first-time host, I can definitely identify with the with all of that. how do you meet your guests? Like, where do they come from? How do they hear about the podcast? How would you like them to hear about the podcast?
For the most part, so I'm part of Facebook groups that are meant for podcasters and people who want to be on podcasts. So you'll find that a lot of the guests I've had up until now are business owners because they are actively seeking podcasts to be on. But they tend not to act, it's not really about their businesses, but that's just the way it works. So I've met a lot of people just through these Facebook groups, and sort of the longer I do this, the more, guests are referring the podcast to people that they know. So there's a word of mouth aspect that's starting to come into play now as well, which is pretty cool.
Good. Yeah, I know that at least one of your guests has been a good buddy of mine, and I was surprised when he volunteered, but he jumped right at it. And I know that he's episode 17 or something. So I know you've had a wide variety of people on, not just fellow business owners, but yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. I'm starting to get a few more men, but they're, I think, maybe about a quarter of the interviews. And yeah, there's a lot of different ages and stages and races and everybody represented. Like this is not suicidal ideation is not something that affects just me, upper middle class or middle class white women, who have led your sort of standard waspy life. It affects people from all economic backgrounds, from all corners of the world. Like it is a universal part of being human, which then also just makes it mind-blowing that we don't talk about it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm hoping that not just my podcast, but other things that we're doing, that we're being more open with mental health and talking about it and making it known that mental health is as important as physical health. And, I remember when we were kids, and I've said this on the podcast before, like I remember my mom would whisper when somebody had cancer. They wouldn't say it out loud. Like it was very hush hush. You didn't talk about it, which I never understood as a child. Like it's a disease. Like why do we have to whisper it?
Right. They didn't choose to go out there and get it.
Right. It was like if you said it out loud, somehow you'd get it or something. And that's kind of the stigma with mental health. Like we don't talk about it because, then you're crazy or something. Like there's a long time. And even, a friend's mom is starting to show signs of dementia. And every time my friend brings it up with her mom, like maybe we should go to the doctor, her mom is very defensive and like, I'm not crazy. And it's like, well, no, it's just a disease that you have, the same as, if you had diabetes or cancer or something else, you'd go to the doctor. Or a cold.
That has no stigma.
Right. But there's so much stigma around mental health, and we just need to get rid of it. And suicide is, of course, the deepest, darkest corner of mental health. And yeah, we just need to bring it to the light so that it stops being that. And people can get the help that they need without being embarrassed or feeling like they're a burden or whatever number of reasons they have for not talking about it.
And that's something in my notes I wasn't really sure how to bring in. You allude to suicide as what you call darkest moments, and it's a very personal experience. It's a very personal topic, and for some very shameful. And you're right; it needs to be out there. So, and I think as a society we've stigmatized it too. Yes, as a group of human beings, all on Instagram or whatever, we're all getting semicolon tattoos and things, and so supporting each other. But there are still laws that if you've been on depression medication, or if you you're expected to disclose if you have ever had suicidal thoughts or seen a therapist for certain things. And there's still a bias against folks who are willing to admit publicly that they've been through this.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
Oh, it's a big one. Yes.
But
the movement always has to be, ahead of the change. It'll never change if we don't talk about it.
No, that's true.
So
we have to drive the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple more questions. If I may invite you to brag a little. You've been a lot of things before you were a podcaster. Can you talk about what your life as a professional before you started doing this?
What do you mean? I've been a lot of things.
You've been a teacher, you've been a healer, you're a Reiki master.
Yes.
You have a impressive CV.
Oh, all right. So yes, the very first jobs I had, I guess, as a semi grown up, I was an ESL teacher, which is English as a second language, and an EFL teacher, English as a foreign language. One of them is if you're teaching abroad, and one of them is if you're teaching in an English speaking country. So I did both of those things, which was great and fun. And then I had kids, and I was a mom, stay-at-home mom, and raised my kids and loved every minute of it. And then, then I went to massage school and learned massage therapy. And then I learned Reiki while I was at massage school. So then I started a business when I graduated doing massage therapy and Reiki. And then I just kept learning and growing and doing more and experiencing more in the world of energy, and realized that along the way I was also a medium. And then I realized I could do a lot more with my intuitive gifts, and I began to channel. And so, now I do all of those things still. I still love, I don't do massage therapy anymore, but I still love Reiki and energy healing and channeling people's souls and intuitive coaching and helping people in the same way, just find direction in their lives, find their way from, just having all these questions and uncertainties, and helping them not only find the clarity they need to move forward, but also the confidence that those decisions are the right ones for them.
See, I asked you that so that to have an excuse to point out that I think your connection to your fellow humans, and your interest in what's inside, emotionally at the soul level, is very unique. And I think it makes you uniquely positioned to have conversations with people about these types about suicide, about how folks have come out of their holes, and help them to feel safe talking about those dark moments. So
thanks.
The last question I have, what is it that you most want your listeners to take away from the podcast?
Hope. That's simple. Not that hope is ever simple, but that's what I want my listeners to take away is hope. Hope that it will get better for them. Hope that it won't always be this way and feel this way. Yeah, that's it.
All right.
Are we done?
Yeah.
All right.
Till
Well,
next time.
thank you very much for being our guest host today. It's been fun sitting on the other side of the microphone. And maybe we'll do this again someday. If you enjoyed me being the guest, let me know in the comments of this episode. And join us again next week. Thanks for being here. Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.